Good morning, and thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson, and we're continuing our study of 3rd John as part of our larger topic of study, which is the neglected books of the New Testament. Today we're going to look at verses 5 through 8. Yesterday we got into the first introduction, the hello, the greeting of Gaius, and we talked about how unabashedly loving it is. We saw the themes, some of the themes, actually really all three themes that we read in 2nd John included here. But those three themes don't really shape the book in exactly the same way they do 2nd John. The themes being in 2nd John are love, truth, and abide. We have love, truth, and walk in verses 1 through 4. We just see how warm, how personal, and how unreserved his approval is. And there's this theme of joy, which as a theme gets neglected in John's writings. It's important in Jesus' teaching in the Gospel of John, especially John 15, 1 John chapter 1 is a major theme. Joy is such a major theme in John's writing. And it's there, joy, love, the truth, they're all interconnected and necessary to each other. What we're going to have today in verses 5 through 8 is continued praise on the way he's been acting, but also the establishing of what right behavior ought to be. And remember, the topic is hospitality. And in this letter, it's hospitality which has not been extended when it ought to have been extended. And let's not forget what we mean by hospitality. We mean more than just recreational fellowship, although clearly that's part of it. We mean receiving someone into your home and taking responsibility for them as long as they need your hospitality. It's the kind of responsibility that is still taken in villages across the Middle East and in Africa and among more traditional cultures. So anyway, let's read verses 5 through 8 and talk about what's said here. Beloved, you are acting faithfully in whatever you accomplish for the brethren, and especially strangers. And they bear witness to your love for the church. And you will do well to send them on their way in a manner worthy of God. For they went out for the sake of the name, accepting nothing from the Gentiles. Therefore we ought to support such men, that we may be fellow workers with the truth. Okay, there's a connection here to 1 Thessalonians, which is itself, an unreservedly loving and full of praise, which is unreservedly loving and full of praise. And he says, John is saying the same kinds of things to Gaius that Paul says to the Thessalonians. Everybody talks about how good you are, and that makes me so happy, and thank you so much. This is what you ought to have done. This is what everyone ought to do. So thank you for being the good witness and example that you are, because everyone's talking about you as an example. I want to talk about two words in these verses you may have noticed that leapt out at you. One is strangers, and the other is Gentiles. Often in the New Testament, those words are interchangeable. Ethne, the nations, it's the word that the Jews used for people who were not Jews. They were part of the nations, Auslanders, those people who are outside of the group. Of course, stranger is just our word the word xenos, from which we get our word xenophobia. And often when that word is used in the New Testament, it's used to mean people who are not Christians. But evidently, these are Christians. These strangers are Christians. They're included in his love for the church in the very next verse, verse 6. And so at the end of the first century, when most Christians are Gentiles, the word Gentile is clearly come to mean people who are not Christian. And the church has grown so much that although word gets around and people stay connected, The church is a large enough fellowship that you don't necessarily know everybody the way you would have done a generation or two earlier. And so that makes offering hospitality that much more necessary. And it also makes offering hospitality trickier, I would think, which both 2nd and 3rd John communicate to us. I also want us to notice what he says in 7 and 8, because that verse 7 also connects with 1 Thessalonians. In 1 Thessalonians, Paul takes a long time to say, this is the way we acted when we were with you. We did not take anything. We worked to support ourselves while we were there. Now, that broke the mold for traveling philosophers, teachers, holy men in the 1st century. They expected to be paid for their services. But Christian missionaries, they were working missionaries. Now, it is also true that there was, at the same time, there was this culture of itinerant philosophers and teachers, a culture of hospitality. That is expected. And it was expected by Jesus in Matthew chapter 10 when he sent out the 12, 2 by 2. And he told them, you accept the hospitality extended to you and you stay in that house. You don't jump around looking for better accommodations or a better cook. You stay right there until you leave. So that level of support was expected, the hospitality that one extended to traveling missionaries. And so we ought to support such men. And Paul expects this. Paul expects this in Romans 16 for Phoebe, verse 1. So anyway, that's what ought to happen. What ought to happen is that Christian missionaries go out and they do not expect payment from the people they're evangelizing. But those Christians who are already there are expected to extend hospitality to them and to provide for their needs while they are among them. That's what's supposed to happen. As we'll find out tomorrow, that's not what is happening. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes. We'll see you then.